far as all the popular biohacks are concerned, what are the ones that you feel personally have the biggest bang for the buck and ones that are probably just smoke and mirrors and not really necessary?
I'm a big fan of BTC, as a peptide for inflammation and the recovery. Absolutely just short. Direct sun in the morning for 20 minutes plus hydration plus high protein. Those are kind of, again, the non-negotiables. Some other ones I would maybe give more credence to are, again, things like PEMF or electrical magnetic, frequency treatment in general. We're starting to see a lot of, really cool research continue to come out about that, and TMS and, those types of modalities, essentially.
And we are live. Thoryn, how are you, brother?
Fantastic. How are we doing, Robert?
Good, man. Good. You're probably typically jumping on podcasts talking about brain development, micro habits, all that good stuff. But I want to start off with backcountry, man. Like, when was your last backcountry trip?
Oh, yeah. I'm in the backcountry pretty regularly. I would say, during the winter, quite a bit of skiing, live in Colorado. And so, could be multi-day trips in the backcountry there. I would say, the longer trips of late, a lot of cycling. So we cycle here up to Independence Pass, it's the Continental Divide. Haven't done much camping, but the last big trip I did was actually kite surfing in Egypt. And so that was last month. And so that was like, we were on boats. So I wouldn't say it was like backcountry, but that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Have you ever been to Alaska?
Oh, yeah, many times. Yeah. Done a number of trips back there.
How does Alaska compare to Colorado? It's just more out there than Colorado, obviously.
Alaska is the final frontier. We've done wilderness trips where, again, we've taken planes in and gone camping, and, you're dealing with grizzlies. I've actually gone camping in Denali as an example, and there are grizzlies all over, and you're kind of cohabitating, so it's not necessarily risky per se, but, you definitely need to be aware.
And you're going out there mostly snowboarding and skiing?
Yeah, tons. Yeah, I do a lot of snow camping in the winters, and again, in the summers, a lot of just multi-day backpacking and so forth. But
nice. I lived in Washington State for a few years, and I got into snowboarding there, just enough to not bust my ass as frequently as I was. But I am no pro by any means. It's pretty fun though. I enjoy it.
It's one of my life passions for sure. Yeah.
And you did triathlons and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, I do a number of triathlons. I just did Steamboat Springs. That was about 2 weeks ago. And then I have a team that's getting ready to do Malibu. That's September 13th, so about 6 weeks away. And we do that to raise fundraising for Challenged Athlete Foundation, and have a great group that try to raise that every year.
Very cool. Well, you're like the head of Brain One. I want to dive into that. But what was the origin story for you having such a passion and interest for doing hard stuff to begin with, man? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, thank you. So, my background is molecular biology. So I'm a scientist and really a researcher at my core. Began my career on the bench, quite literally doing biotech drug development. I was in the molecular biology, but generally the genomics side of the house, and really focusing on the gene expression models. So the idea of looking at novel proteins, essentially. So DNA makes RNA, makes proteins, and we would find novel, essentially gene targets, and then we would express them, and then we would test against them. And so very much focused in measurement in general. And then as I went out of biotech, I moved to LA, and I basically became a data scientist. And so started off very much as a on the ground level, moved my way up pretty quickly, but with the focus always on measurement and how can we measure human behavior and then ultimately optimize against it. And then parallel in my 20s, I began trail running. I was always very active as a youth, and snowboarding, skiing in particular, but began trail running, doing Susan G. Komen, 10Ks, and then half marathons, and then I got into full Ironmans. And it was through that experience I began to use wearables. So, currently this is the Garmin and Oura. I have 10 different wearables that I'll test continually. But that was really kind of the impetus of using data to optimize biology, and that idea of biological tuning, essentially of using data. And what I could find, what I found back then, this is when we had the big chunky Garmins, they've gotten much more efficient and better at battery life, but that I could optimize, my biology again by using data. So things like heart rate, I could attenuate my lactic threshold by, going X amount longer and, so forth, and really optimizing not only my biology, but ultimately my race times. And it was all for fun. But it's really where I saw the value and the use of using wearable data in the day-to-day.
Very cool. Very cool. I've got the Garmin, kind of like we were talking about before we started recording. I got
Yeah.
the Oura before I
Yep.
lost it, and I've used, like, I'm a big data advocate. Like, I'm tracking macros, manipulating inputs, all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff, optimizing sleep. But
Right.
I also am very intuitive with a lot of stuff I do, especially when it comes to heart rate training. I never train based off of heart rate.
Okay.
I just recently got a VO2 max done
Yeah.
for the first time 2 weeks ago. So it's kind of piqued my interest in, because I'm doing a little bit more endurance work right now.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd be curious to know how you, in your sport, like, how do you use the Garmin specifically? Like, what are you looking at? What are you
Yeah.
manipulating? What's your
Sure.
main use case?
Yeah, so we're actually doing, again, a research study right now, and we're comparing multiple wearables and then seeing the variance in the data sets. So that's been really interesting. There's a definition for HRV, but every algorithm and every wearable is different, and so the
Mm-hmm.
data will always be differently. So if you're, always be different. So if you're looking at the trends, it's okay. But, if you're comparing one number to another, it will never be exactly the same, of course. What we've seen in the data, though, is in general, I try to use the Oura for sleep. I think it's one of the most accurate. It's also the least invasive. And then I use Garmin for activity is kind of my tandem. And we've compared it to Whoop. Whoop's generally pretty good because it's just a single band, but of course you need the phone as the interface. So just depending if you're in the backcountry or don't have your phone, that could be an issue. But yeah, we've been looking at essentially all the wearables that are out there. And then relative to my use, so I use let's say the Garmin, right? I do use I use heart rate. I mean, that's definitely a good metric, resting heart rate, and then heart rate variability. But when I'm training and I'm doing, let's say training right now for the Malibu Triathlon, I'll look at my averages essentially of heart rate for a specific sport at a specific intensity and then see, does that change over time, ultimately. So if I know I have to do a 15-mile bike ride, what would be my average training heart rate, and then see if I can, increase that, decrease it, depending on whatever that use case might be for the particulars of the race. That's why I do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you're ideally just trying to see that heart rate, decreasing as you're able to maintain or improve intensity of the activity itself.
Exactly. Yep. And so that's where you're using other things like wattage, on the bike as an example. But, you can generally get a good amount out of just the typical wearables. So
Triathlons are no joke, man. I've never done one, but I've got the guy that I did the VO2 max with. He just opened
yeah,
up a location with the DEXA Fit and all that good stuff. And
cool.
he's training for he may be training for Malibu too, actually.
Oh, cool. No way.
But he's done a few of them. He's talking to me about it. And I'm like, man, I don't know the last time I stepped on a bike or went for a swim. So like those would be my weak points for sure.
For sure. I mean, swimming's usually everyone's weakest, just in general, unless you were collegiate. I mean, I'm a pretty good swimmer. I've done full Ironman, but every time I get into the pool, it's almost like starting over to a degree. I cycle regularly here in Colorado. We do a lot of trail running, up to 13, 14,000 foot. But yeah, swimming is my weakest for sure. So, but you
Have you
really,
ever done
go ahead.
Have you ever done like an ultra marathon in
I haven't
Colorado?
done any ultras. I peaked out at Ironmans. I did two. I did Ironman Arizona and then Wales. And then I'm such a big skier and snowboarder and backcountry and all of that. I've had 4 knee surgeries, and finally my doctor was like, "Hey, you can keep doing Ironmans. You're going to need a knee replacement." And so now I only do the shorter distances. I do the sprints primarily, and try to place on those. But that's been really the focus, given the knees, until it's sufficient enough just to do a knee surgery. And at what point then I would consider it. But
Have you played around with any like the peptides or stem cells or anything like that for the knee?
oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've done a PRP a number of times, and I've done peptides for, years, essentially, primarily BPC 157, the most common, of course, for inflammation and whatnot. That's been
Nice.
pretty much my go-to.
Yeah, surgeries would be scary, especially if you've got like an athletic. Like my mom just had both of her hips replaced and then one of her knees.
Yeah.
And it's like, but she's not doing the type of athletic stuff that I am. It's like, man, if I'm so used to training and then I have to go in for surgery and not knowing the outcome of that recovery, it's like, I mean, that'd be wrecking me.
Yeah. It's, I think about that frequently. Again, I've had like 4 knee surgeries, and now I'm thinking about another ACL. And so at the beginning of the season, and we ski almost every day here in the winters as much as we can. And so you're putting such pressure in that case on, my knee ligaments. It just depends. So now I'm like thinking at the end of the season, is it better just to get it done? So, I have 6 months to recover and I can ski, but we'll see, kind of play it by ear. But
You think the wear and the tear on the knees mostly from the skiing?
mostly from the skiing. Yeah. I mean, when I was doing a lot of like city marathons on cement, that like completely tears up the joints. But, with skiing and snowboarding, it's the lateral movement, and we're aggressive skiers here. So
Yeah.
that'll do it. That said, I started doing Pilates probably about 2.5 years ago, and I do it now probably 3 to 4 days a week. And I do hot Pilates in particular. And it's one of the hardest classes we have in town. And it's also really helped with my cross training of skiing. So, my general health protocol is hot Pilates like 3 or 4 days a week, and then roughly 3 to 4 days of cardio. And then,
How
of
hard
course,
do they have it cranked up in there?
105, roughly, depending. Yeah.
It's pretty toasty, man.
Yeah, no, it's hot. But you come out of that room a different human.
Yeah.
So, and it forces the sweat. So you're getting all the benefits of that and, like a typical sauna workout. So, but yeah, you come out, bring 2 liters of water and usually drink all.
That's wild, man. All right. So talk to me about Brain One. So I was perusing on the website before we jumped on here, and then you kind of gave me a rundown as well. But I like that. Like the whole biohacking space is on fire right now. And with that, you're seeing a massive push towards, tech and supplementation. But the thing that stood out about yours was that there's a big emphasis on like micro habits. And I'm a huge advocate of figuring out something that you can implement on a day-to-day basis and then never deviating from it. Like that's my superpower as a human if I had one. Like
awesome.
Figure out what I need to do on a day-to-day basis and then without fail, do not deviate. So dive into that, man.
Yeah. So, the genesis was from my background as a peak, performance athlete, first and foremost. Again, having done Ironmans where you're continually optimizing nutrition, as you're very familiar with, right? But you're out on the bike, you've got hydration, electrolytes, carbohydrates, some level of protein, and you're optimizing all these things. And if you get any one of them off, you're, basically hitting a wall. So it was kind of from that general mindset. And then as I was going down the road, I was doing some pro bono work with a group out of Columbia University, and I saw a need for just better resources in brain health and in brain fitness specifically. And so was basically, came up with the concept of using health protocols and scaling them. And so what does that mean? So what we've done initially is we will take a scientific paper. Have you heard the hypothesis dementia is preventable?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty prevalent, nowadays. Generally, it's referred to from the Lancet 2020. So if you Google Lancet 2020 dementia, the paper will come up. And what they've done is they've identified 12 modifiable, what they call risk factors or just behavioral modifications, micro habits, things that you can do to lessen your propensity for dementia. And there's 55 million cases worldwide, with dementia, and this would potentially help support 30 to 40% of them. So we're talking tens of millions of users, at this stage. And so we'll take that paper, we run it through the AI, we get an editorial, and then we get a protocol people can quite literally follow of things, micro habits to do every day. And so a protocol is comprised of micro habits. A micro habit could be nutrition, supplements, including peptides, of course. We have a huge database of those. And then it can also include, just like the behavioral things that you do every day, like cold plunging, right? Cold plunging would be a micro habit as part of your health protocol. And then even within cold plunging, you have multiple variables that you can optimize. So, frequency per week, duration of, the session, temperature of the session, would be like 3 immediate variables. And so we're constantly optimizing essentially the protocol and then the micro habits to that human Robert. And we also have over 300 wearables that are integrated today. So every major wearable you can imagine. And then where we're going next is essentially test for could be like blood-based biomarkers, as an example for things like brain health. And so looking at, let's say there's a company we partner with, there's a series of cognition tests, 6 blood biomarkers. And so people can come in, they can integrate, their wearables, and then they could look at, doing a test such as this. And then they would get their baseline cognition and then undergo a program and a protocol, and then ultimately see if there's improvements over time. That's the general idea.
So is it like tracking? Like what is people like if somebody's like, okay, I've got a family history of Alzheimer's dementia, I'm going to jump on this. What does that look like from their workflow standpoint? They go in, they pull that protocol out, and then it generates their micro habits that they need to be checking off on a day-to-day basis?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah. So we, again, we have a database of protocols. There's over 400. And then the user can come in, they can select one, and then they can integrate their wearables and then use the AI to actually tailor the, essentially the program and the protocol to them, Robert, you as a human based on your actual data.
And if you're like, do you need to check off the habit, or is it like picking up the fact, like if you're one of your habits is go for a run, but then your
Yep.
wearables that's integrated shows that you've got elevated heart rate and you've tracked a run on your Garmin for 30 minutes, is it automatically
That's what we're
notifying you?
working on now. Yeah. So there's active and passive tracking essentially. And so right now the core platform is based on adherence. You signed up for this. Did you do the things that you signed up for? Yes or no? And then you track it. That would be active. You're literally saying, yes, I went on this run. We generally have people do that, in the evenings, essentially reflecting on the day, voice journal, all those types of things. And then secondly, a human can, yeah, I mean, basically that's the primary way it would be tracked. But secondly, it could be, essentially passive tracking, seeing that they have an increase and, they did this activity, or they're logging the activity in a Garmin or a Strava, whatever it might be. And then we could tell they did that thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
So on you're kind of like the guinea pig, being the head honcho of this. So like, what does your daily micro habit stack look like?
Yeah. So I have a series of non-negotiables, and we initially went down this road. I mean, I don't love the term biohacking, but that, concept of biological optimization, longevity, and so we took protocols from all of the major longevity practitioners out of there, anything that's been published. We looked at Ryan Johnson and Blueprint. We looked at Peter Attia, Kayla Barnes, and basically analyzed them and saw what are the patterns essentially across every single longevity protocol ever, right? And there's your non-negotiables. So things like nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress are kind of like the four pillars that you see across every one of these protocols. And so mine generally breaks down into those four categories. So relative to nutrition, I will do a intermittent fast till usually about 10 or 11 in the morning, ideally starting about 7 or 8 the night before. Nutrition wise, it depends on how I'm training, but I've got a full regimen of supplements, ranging from omega-3s to I use like Thoryn multivitamins, I use magnesium, somewhat basic. When I'm fully training, I'll use BPC as a peptide. And then you have your exercise. So as I mentioned, just my general there would be hot Pilates, hot yoga 3 days a week, and then something fairly long on the cardio side, 50, 60 miles on the bike, trail running and things like that. And then, relative to stress and sleep, just management tools there could be breath work. It also could be, just regular bedtime routines, circadian regulation, from sun in the morning and then, trying to wind down by, let's say, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So those are the general, and I can actually share my health protocol with you and you can see exactly what that looks like in Brain One as well.
Nice. Are you, I know we were talking about Oura before we started recording. Have you looked into that 8 Sleep or Sleep 8 or whatever it's called?
Yeah, but I'm very interested. That one looks cool. We actually integrate into them. We have an API already, but I haven't played around with it. But yeah, that one I've heard is a game changer.
Yeah, I feel like thermoregulation, happening simultaneously as you sleep would be the way to go. Especially, we just had a son a couple weeks ago, so like we got a lot of bodies in the bed right now, and I get hot, and my wife doesn't want it to be too hot for the baby or too cold for the baby. So like having my own thermoregulated side would make all the difference.
Yes, you should definitely consider it. They're not cheap, but I've heard very much worth the investment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to like habit stacking in general, I feel like a lot of people struggle with this. Like when I'm working with clients, I'm trying to get them to adhere to a specific macro protocol and, good dietary choices. Like I've become part nutrition coach and like part therapist, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it work within their lifestyle. And it's almost like in order for habits to be formed, there's got to be a strong enough desire for them to want to do it, obviously, first and foremost. But it's almost like there has to be some form of consequence if they don't adhere. And this can be different for the individual. But like in your working with people and trying to get things, consistent, how have you found the most luck in adherence, like just getting them to stick with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So adherence depends on motivation, right? Like if you ask a human to do a thing, what is their motivation? And generally that's driven by value. And so it just depends on, what that human's motivation is. And so where we've actually been seeing a lot of, we actually have a B2B product. That's our primary product that we're taking to market, working with practitioners in the longevity space as an example. And so, or another big one is actually surgeons. So surgeons that have pre and post-op protocols. And so what we see is very high adherence for surgeons or medical professionals post-surgery, because generally speaking, if you've had a surgery, you want to heal as efficiently and effectively as you can. And so in that case, you have a much higher adherence in general, right? But to answer your question more broadly, really the strategy we take is using cognitive behavioral therapy and education, as an integral part of that. Like, again, it comes back to that point. If people see the value of doing the thing, then they have a higher propensity of actually doing it. And so it's very small baby steps. Like some of our more advanced protocols, can have 26, 30, 40 micro habits as an example. People really have to start small, especially if they've never used the concept of a protocol. So literally like changing one habit a week can be massive, for a normal human. But it is that concept of using CBT and then specifically like cue and rewards. How do we show them the value? How do we educate them and then ask them to do the thing? And then we also have implemented different layers of algorithmic, messaging essentially. And so getting them at the right time and those pieces are also really critical in that pathway.
You feel like there's like milestone achievements, weigh heavily on people in a positive light, like knowing that they've got some goal they've reached, micro goal?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So one of our new partnerships we're actually about to announce is with do you watch football offhand?
Not really, but I'm familiar with sport.
I'm not, honestly, I'm more of like a board guy and, triathlon. But so we partnered with this amazing athlete named Malik Jackson. Malik is a Super Bowl 50, Super Bowl champion. I mean, I think he was MVP of that game. And just such an awesome, amazing human. He's got a group called the Care League that focuses on protocols and, essentially health plans, concierge for ex-NFL athletes. And a lot of these guys are dealing with TBI, tragically. You're seeing some of the stuff in the news. They're dealing with mental health, purpose in these things. And so and going down this road with Malik, we're really excited. We're working with a bunch of NFL guys on this. But the concept, again, of how do you incentivize them? And what we found is to your question, using things like leaderboards and gamification, and not cheesy, airline status gamification or like retail models, but again, trying to incentivize them to do the thing using those types of, testing essentially those types of models now. And leaderboards are a good example. Are you on Strava?
Yeah, I've got a Strava account.
Yeah. So I use Strava more than any other social platform, and I just do it for myself. I mean, that said, there's like leaderboards on Strava, and then there's like King of the Hill and Local Legend and, those types of things. And those are just drivers, those are helpful in getting people, again, committed, driving motivation and, showing value. So those are some of the areas that we, are testing and have seen great success with.
And I feel like people that are using this software tech in the first place probably have some essence of competitiveness in their nature because they're trying to do this to get better themselves. And when you start getting better, you kind of wind up becoming more competitive by default. So having like a leaderboard functionality makes a lot of sense.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we started off more in the peak performance side, but to be clear, we want, our grandparents to use these protocols. We don't just want to focus there. So we're looking at ways of making these even digestible for older humans where maybe it's not a digital device. It's like a printed out protocol they can follow on their fridge, things like that. But yeah, that's, I think that's accurate.
The older demographic's tough, man. Like I've got grandparents as all of us do. And it's like, man, like there's a lot of ignorance around, what is a macronutrient? Like they don't know the difference between carbs, fats, and proteins or things like that. And to be fair, like when they were growing up, we weren't in near the, metabolic syndrome that we are now. So it wasn't really top of mind. But yeah, trying to break things down for them and get them motivated and seeing the bigger picture is challenging for sure.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, like most doctors, I mean, how many days do they spend in medical school studying nutrition? I mean, it's pretty crazy. I have a quick anecdote. I broke my clavicle here in Colorado 2 years ago, and I went to the Steadman Institute. It's the number one orthopedic in the U.S., NBA, NFL, all of those guys. And I go in, they do an x-ray, and she's like, oh yeah, her clavicle is completely broken. Here you go. And threw me a sling. And so my healthcare protocol was literally immobilization, right? You don't move your arm. That was it though, and I was like, okay, great. What do I do? Is there anything to follow? And she's like, there's a piece of paper or something they gave me. And I went to my network and I asked them in my group, and I have a lot of nutritionists and dietitians as part of the Brain One family. And I, asked them, I was like, hey, I broke my clavicle. What do you guys think? They're like, oh, collagen, bone broths, and so I started making bison stews and, soups. And then I was actually doing PEMF as well. Do you know PEMF? Are you familiar with that as a modality, right? Pulse electrical magnetic frequency. I've done PEMF for years, but I did some this really interesting localized PEMF where it like pulled, the electricity through the bone. And long story short, I went back to Stedman, and she's like, come back in 6 weeks, and I was traveling, so I went back in 3.5. They do an X-ray. She's like, oh my gosh, this is completely healed. What have you been doing? And I was like, oh, I was focusing on my nutrition. And like one of the top, doctors at Stedman was like, oh, we never would have thought of that. Literally, they never would have thought of nutrition as an integral part of the human healing process. And that was like one of the epiphany moments in working towards like developing Brain One. It just didn't make sense to me. And so to the point, not only our parents, our grandparents, they didn't really, they learned the food pyramid, like, what, are you kidding me? And thank God it's being, essentially updated as we speak. But how crazy is that to think that, grains are, essentially the staple of everything. And that's what our grandparents grew up with. And ultimately most doctors, like that's what they're basically signing on for, for the majority. So part of it is education. And that's actually a really integral part of what we've built is around educating, humans and trying to give them science, evidence-based, peer-reviewed articles that they can ultimately make their own informed decision upon. But that's really the
it's interesting. Like I'm in the, evidence-based bodybuilding community all the time, and there's so much discourse around various nutritional studies and training modalities. And it's like there's so many studies that people they don't know what actions to put into place because there's so many seemingly conflicting pieces of information. So I like what you got going, that it basically synthesizes all this information and then aggregates it over all the data coming in and then just develops legitimate micro habits that people can implement day one.
Yeah. That's it. Literally. It's a massive challenge. You have to look at every single study and is there a bias? And so again, what we've done is we've gone the route of taking peer-reviewed studies that we've approved and then using that as the backbone for the content and the education, as opposed to just like using an AI and being like, hey, tell me about heart rate variability and triathlon and da-da-da. So we're, again, starting with a paper and then developing, the content, the programs and protocols. But yeah.
What do you think? And you mentioned before we started recording too that there's like a journaling. That's one quote unquote biohack that I know I need to get better at, but I am not very good at all. Especially like old fashioned pen and paper journaling. But you've got a voice functionality there now.
We do, yeah. So I'm a scientist at my core, researcher. I literally have I'm not joking, 70 of these journals. Like this is when I was in the lab, we would just take notes with everything. So I have like work journals and then I have personal journals that I've used off and on for years. We have digitized that with a journal in the app and the experience. And we have focused on voice, actually. And voice is interesting because it's also a biometric. And so when people log in, they go through a short assessment, they can integrate their wearables, and then they have the option of using essentially a voice recorder as a biometric. And the reason is because you can see like the amount of variables that we can get out of a voice biometric are nuts. There was a study recently, they were able to diagnose autism essentially through voice. Emotion is actually fairly easy to get to. And so we've been testing essentially people coming in and they're leaving a voice journal, but they can also opt in to leave a voice biometric. And then they don't need to sync a wearable. Ultimately, if they don't have a wearable, they can't afford a wearable, so they can actually use voice. So there's some really interesting testing we're doing on that front. And the goal is also to reach, older audiences that definitely don't have biometrics. Some, but it's rare. But instead, they could use this type of functionality if they choose to. And I actually did an interesting analysis where I was able to see correlation in the initial data between voice and HRV coming out of Oura, as an example. So
very cool. So like you can record into it. Can you go back retroactively and listen to the recording as well as see the text?
Yeah, exactly. So it transcribes it into a written text, and you can approve all this. It's all opt-in. I mean, we're very upfront about the data collection and so forth. But you approve it, and then it's a transcription, and then ultimately you also have that signal that's processed, and then that becomes a trendable graph, and you can see how that trends over time. And then we've compared that to, we're actually doing a research study now where we're comparing, voice with a number of wearables, and then just seeing, do these things trend? What's the variance between HRV out of Oura versus Whoop versus Garmin? And there's variances in all of it, of course, but, are they trending together?
Is it possible to get like a synopsis of the primary thoughts that you're, having and journaling over the course of time? Like, for instance, if I'm doing this voice journaling on my way to the coffee stand every day, for instance, and then I want to get an overview of what is on my mind and therefore in my journal over the past 3 months, does it kind of like get the highlights?
We're not there yet. It's something we've talked about. The content is also sensitive. And so, we're not necessarily analyzing the semantics or the words per se. We could, but, currently we're not. We're using it's more the actual voice, no inflections, the recording to then drive the analysis essentially. So slightly
But if I
different
was
use
like
case.
really bummed, it would pick
Yeah,
up that I'm bummed for an extended period of time. Or if I'm like euphoric, it would notate that as well.
potentially. Yep. Yeah, I mean
Man, that's
that's
cool,
literally what
man.
we're testing right now. So we're doing an IRB approved research study about exactly this. And some of these things I've done myself. I mean, I've done time series, for years, just personally as an interest in these things. And but it's cool. And now between again voice, facial recognition, iris recognition, I mean, there's an incredible amount of data. You can tell hypertension just with a facial scan with nearly the same accuracy as a blood pressure monitor on your arm. Literally just with a scan, 30 seconds, boom. As an example. So the technology is getting much better.
Yeah, the landscape right now is wild, man. It's like I'm a purist traditionalist in so many
Yeah.
ways. But it's like I've got to bridge the gap between taking
Yeah.
advantage of all the tools and resources that we have at our disposal now, but just not to the detriment of the foundational core stuff that's positive that comes from that fundamental mindset. And that's the hard part, man, because it's like we live in this weird dichotomy in 2025.
100%. And honestly, there's just there's a flooding of the market, especially in anything neurotech relative to devices or even supplements. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. The number of products that are on the market. And that's part of the reason we went down this road is to help better inform. And there are some, really good products that are, becoming consumer facing where you can literally do, EEG and neurofeedback with like a band at home instead of going and seeing a therapist. And so for certain humans, you have to meet them where they're at, then that's like a really good option for them. But again,
Yeah.
the accuracy, how many clinical trials have they done? Generally, a lot of this stuff is not FDA approved, for better or worse on that. But
Yeah, totally. What's your take on just behavioral thought in general? That seems, I've talked about this on quite a few podcasts lately, but like the people that are in the nutrition, performance-based, biohacking space, like they're in hook, line, and sinker. Like they want to get all the wearables. They want to dive as deep into the research. They want to implement as much as they possibly can. Then you've got the other subset of the population that seems to be totally oblivious to these tools and resources and just continues to get unhealthier and unhealthier. So like the bell curve has gotten more narrow. I mean, you've got just two polar extremes more so than a blended median. What is the catalyst to get people on the right track in the first place? Do you think it's going to be like this implosion point of which society just simply can't sustain itself as they get unhealthier, or what's going to happen?
I think it will be a combination. And I think we're seeing this right now. The fact that Andrew Huberman can do a 3-hour podcast with his retention rate, and the fact that people are listening to 3-hour science-based podcasts is amazing. And I think as the technology gets more ubiquitous, Kennedy just announced that every American should have a wearable. As a side note, I mean that's pretty progressive. Whether you like his policies or not, I mean that's one that's interesting, and it really lends itself to the ability for the technology just to get easier for people to use. So accessibility is part of that, and then two is how do you drive action from the thing. I think that's what a lot of these wearables don't do as well, and it's a gap that we're filling. Is it's one thing to say, okay, your HRV is elevated, what have you been doing? But then offering really practical mechanisms to try to reduce, your HRV and improve your ability to rest. What does that look like for parasympathetic regulation, basically? So I believe that we're seeing that trend, shift more and more. I mean, I think we're seeing it in real time. And I remember 10 years ago, I was doing a triathlon in Central Coast, California. And one of my buddies, we were like camping outdoors, doing a training camp, and he had a red light on his knee. And we're like, Dean, what are you doing over there? And he's like, oh, you got to try this red light thing. This was like over 10 years ago, right? And at the time, no one had heard of red light. It's now on Tony Robbins' homepage, and of course, I'm sure the majority of your readers have all done red light at this stage. So, these things that used to be more fringe are now becoming, more and more ubiquitous. I mean, literally, you're seeing that with, these types of facilities with cryo, as an example, cold plunging, at home cold plunging, and that whole market has just exploded. So I believe we're seeing a shift. And then, again, back to the, USDA side of the house. In general, I like to believe people are getting healthier, or at least, working towards healthier habits. But that's where we're really trying to also focus not just on the peak performance. It's like the everyday user, that can really benefit from that concept. Again, we grew up with very little information outside of the food pyramid on nutrition, and obviously that was completely flawed. And you know this more than anyone as someone as a keto evangelist. So that's my optimism. Ultimately, at the end of the day, yeah, it's just trying to meet, that normal human and also provide accessibility. I would say that's another big one too. Our programs range in cost. Some people can't afford a wearable, right? They can't afford to do a program, but there's other things you can do to essentially manage your autonomic nervous system. So you can go into the river, here in Colorado. I did cold plunging literally here in the rivers, 45 degrees. It's freaking freezing. But, we do it regularly. And so if you don't have a river nearby, you can do a cold shower. You can do breath work as another example. So, these tools, while the diagnostics absolutely cost money, a lot of these things we try to make, accessible for the everyday person to do as well.
It is interesting, man. I'm reading a book. I just read Cam Haynes's Undeniable is his latest one. And then I read, I'm reading The Comfort Crisis right now. And it's interesting talking to people in the biohacking health space. It's like so many of these fundamental recommendations are things that were just by definition happening on a day-to-day basis 500 years ago. We took it for granted. And the world has gotten so much more soft, plush, and comfortable that we have to seek out this adversity, like going to get a cold shower in the river. That just happened everyday basis. Like going, putting forth a bunch of activity, putting a bunch of steps in, hunting down food, cooking a meal with your family. Like all these things that were just, part of the day back then are now things that we've got to call a biohack and get excited about to implement. But it's like, man, it makes such a profound difference. Like obviously eating processed, hyperpalatable junk food and watching Netflix all day is not the cure.
100%. Isolation, that's absolutely a killer. We have also found the power of connection as an example. People who are connected to themselves, to their family, to their higher power, whatever it is. If you have that sense of connection and purpose, your life expectancy increases 10 to 12 years or so. So, the power of connection, just having community and people around you as an example. It's, very, very powerful.
Is there a community functionality within Brain One?
Not yet. We're working on it right now. I intentionally wanted to wait a bit. We started testing with some basic gamification. So, really in some ways competing against yourself, but using things like streaks were built in day one. Did you do the things you said you were going to do on a micro habit basis, on a protocol basis? And now we're building leaderboards and then the ability to follow and share and, all those types of things. But very excited about it. And the sort of the community members as well.
Nice. As far as all the popular biohacks are concerned, the ones that you've played around with and implemented in your own day-to-day routine, what are the ones that you feel personally have the biggest bang for the buck and ones that are probably just smoke and mirrors and not really necessary?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think fundamentally just starting with the non-negotiable and the basics. So as a data scientist myself, measurement, and I wouldn't even call this a biohack per se, but it's the door to understanding your baselines that you can then optimize, right? So minimal, as we discussed, like core is a great example. What, $300, for the ring, $6 a month. And then you have that baseline of your activity plus your sleep data that you can then begin to optimize against. So I think, that would be one I would say out of the gate that can allow you to understand, your data that you can then ultimately optimize against. I think other big ones. I'm a big fan of BPC, as a peptide for inflammation. When I'm here in Colorado and I'm skiing all winter, snowboarding nearly every single day I possibly can, you feel in the joints. And so I definitely feel with something like BPC as a peptide, the inflammation and the recovery absolutely just shortens. You just have to give yourself injections, which, is not always the easiest for some people.
Mm-hmm.
But, what other, again, it's as I go down the list, nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress. Literally for every one of these, circadian regulation, direct sun in the morning for 20 minutes. It doesn't get any simpler than that. So things like that, plus hydration, plus high protein, those are kind of, again, the non-negotiables. And then they get more advanced from there, depending if I'm training or if I'm traveling or, whatever the routine might be.
Are there any that have like really gained popularity and momentum, but you're like, man, this is not worth near the hype that it's been given?
Not that I would say offhand, not necessarily worth the hype. I think some other ones I would maybe give more credence to are, again, things like PEMF or electrical magnetic, frequency treatment in general. We're starting to see a lot of, really cool research continue to come out about that, and TMS and, those types of modalities, essentially. So those are pretty exciting, I would say.
Yeah, I've not done that. I'm familiar with it. But like the electromagnetic pulsing for muscle stimulation, relaxation. Like when my wife was in labor, they had like this electrical thing that they offered her where they could just hook that up to her and it would, I guess distract the intensity of the contractions. But it's like, who would have ever thought about that? But that makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another partner. They're doing binaural beats that they actually use in surgeries to essentially get to a specific, gamma brain frequency. Mm-hmm. And they can do surgeries without anesthesia. We've been hearing some pretty crazy things along those lines. But
the binaural beats is trippy, man. I had a guy on the podcast a while back, and he was like, "You can totally like I used to have really bad OCD, and he's like, you can totally rewire your brain. Basically, gets stuck in a feedback loop, and you've got to like be repetitive to like fulfill that loop. But if you retrain the brain via this binaural feedback, it's like, man, that is totally counter to the drug-induced formula that's typically prescribed."
Yeah, 100%. I try to keep all pharmaceuticals to an absolute minimum, only when necessary. And again, there's a number of these modalities that are out there that can be just as effective. So totally. Those are great examples.
So what's the timeline with Brain One? Like what stage are you at now? Is it live and open to the public, or what's the next milestone there?
Yeah, so we still have it gated. We're allowing people in just on a cohort basis. Our major focus has been working with practitioners, longevity clinics, more progressive functional doctors that are looking for, again, these types of protocols to give to their clients. So that's really where we've been focused. That's been the core revenue model. And then the goal is to open this up and, give away the core protocols to humans. And then, we make money off of subscription and essentially selling the programs themselves.
Very cool. And what's the tentative timeline for when that'll be opened up?
Yeah, so we're testing right now. I think open to the public roughly 3 months is what we're thinking. We've been in beta now about a year, and we're just rigorously testing and making sure we can build the best product that we possibly can. But we're working with a number of clinicians from really across the United States at this stage, and we're live in a number of markets.
Very cool, man. It's exciting. Anything that makes it more accessible, like convenience is such a paramount thing with, adherence. And I feel like this would just strip the barrier of entry from a convenience standpoint in so many ways.
That's it, and it's just making sure the human does the thing that they commit to do, which is the toughest, myself included. We all go through these patterns where sometimes it's the focus, sometimes it's not, but at least giving someone a framework to follow, again, like dementia prevention, Lancet 2020 is an example. if all of our parents and grandparents knew these basic principles, that may impact their behavior and thereby help exacerbate millions of dementia cases. So
100%.
education, is really paramount to that.
What is one more for you, man. What is a habit that you want to and recognize the value in implementing for yourself, but really struggle with?
So cold plunging, but in particular, cold plunging in the shower. So I can go into the river, I can go into the ocean, like I can go into a full body cryo, like a tank. But if I have to do a shower based cold plunge, it's brutal for me. Like
My
nearly
cold plunge
impossible.
scenario is same way, man. Like, cause I've got my cold plunge is just a freaking horse trough that works really great during the winter time, but not worth a darn during the summer. So my cold plunge is on point during the winter months, but during the summer, it's like, man, I need a cold plunge. So I'm just gonna bite the bullet and make one or buy one.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays they're so cheap. You can get one like a standalone. Yeah. I mean, a couple $100, but yeah,
Cold
I would
plunge
say
is good though, man. I think there's been Huberman's talked about, there's certain conjectures to how much it impacts, testosterone and inflammation, things like that. But all of that aside, I think the psychological benefit of just doing that first thing in the morning is in and of itself totally worth it.
I completely agree. I think it's game changing. Another one for me is, again, sweat, but specifically either sauna or doing a heated exercise of some sort. Like that has been absolutely game changing.
You have a sauna at your place?
We do. Yeah, we have one upstairs. And then I do the hot Pilates 3 or 4 days a week. And that's usually plenty for sweating.
Do you do the contrast therapy when you're doing it at your home? Sauna and cold plunge?
Yeah, we have a cold plunge and a sauna. So just depending, try to do both. Although I, still prefer the river actually, or doing it live. So don't use it as much as I might. But again, it just depends on the schedule.
Nice. I was in New York for a while at a conference. They had a traditional Russian bathhouse there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And man, I was definitely out of place. Like I got my southern drawl going. Everybody else is speaking Russian. I'm probably in the middle of the Russian mob. Who knows? And they got it cranked way up. Then we transitioned from that to the cold plunge, and we'd go back and forth 3 times. And man, the first time I went from the sauna to the cold plunge, I got so dizzy. I almost passed out. I'm like, this is not normal.
Yeah, I've done the same exact protocols. I love that. Honestly, I think it's great. And I think it really builds. I think you do get better at it the more you do. But yeah, those first few times can be brutal, and they are incredibly hot. And then they whip you with the branches. Is that the experience, right? Which increases circulation and so forth. And then jumping into the cold, which is 40 degrees or something crazy. So,
but I walked out of that, man, so relaxed. It was
100%.
It was euphoric, man. I was just so relaxed. I could have slept for 2 days afterwards, probably.
Yeah. Again, regulation of that parasympathetic, I've seen it myself, with friends who are going through something. You get them in a cold plunge, take them to the river. It's come out a different person. So, and that's something you can do for free, depending on where you're living, or at least in a cold shower. So those are the types of, areas that we're focusing on for accessibility.
Totally agree, man. Well, speaking of Pagosa Springs, you're in Colorado. I was doing that because they got the hot springs there. So I would finish that as the hunting trip every year. We'd go in, do the hot springs, and we'd jump in the river and just transition back and forth. And that was the perfect end cap to a hunting trip.
Yeah, I haven't done Pagosa. I've been down there. But yeah, there's a bunch of hot springs up and down that range, and same thing. They're on rivers, and yeah, that's a perfect example of a natural contrast therapy.
Yeah, super cool, man.
Really good.
Well, I'm stoked for what you got going at Brain One, man. 3 months is no time at all. So once it goes live, will you send out an email to everybody that's subscribed to the list?
Yep. Yeah, we've got you, Robert, and keep in the loop, and appreciate your efforts and all the things you're doing, and putting nutrition and health first. And any way we can support, please let us know.
Likewise, man. If you're really listening that wants to get more information, they just go to brain1.com.
Yep, brain.one. And actually, brain.one. And sign up for the wait list, mention your name. We'll put them to the front of the list.
Awesome, man. Well, I do appreciate Thoryn. Keep killing it, man. Keep changing lives. Yeah. And if there's anything I can do for you, just let me know.
Okay, I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you so much.
Hey, man.